I bought a woman for $1. Let that sink in. One single silver dollar passed from my hand to the grimiest slave trader in the town of Redemption. I didn't do it to own her. I did it to save her. Or at least that's the story I told myself. Her name was Tala, a Comanche woman bound at the wrists, standing on a splintered auction block with her head held high. The sun beat down on the dusty Texas plains of 1878, but her eyes held a fire that could have burned the whole town to ash. The men jeered. They spat. They bid pennies for her, for the right to break her spirit, and I couldn't stand it. 5 years. For 5 years, I'd been a ghost on my own ranch, a hollow man carved out by the fever that took my wife, Sarah. The silence of that place was a tomb, and I was its willing prisoner. But seeing Tala, seeing that unbroken pride in the face of such ugliness, something inside me snapped. So I threw down the dollar. The trader laughed, the crowd grumbled, and I walked away with her, cutting the ropes from her wrists the second we were clear of the town. I didn't say a word. I just led her back to my ranch, that lonely scar on the face of the earth. I pointed to the barn. "You can stay there," I grunted. I gave her a cot, a blanket, and a bucket of fresh water. I thought I was being noble, a good man doing a good thing. But the truth is, when you bring a storm into a quiet house, you can't complain when the walls start to shake. And I had just invited in a hurricane. That first week, she was a ghost just like me, a shadow moving at the edge of my vision. I'd be mending a fence, and I'd feel her eyes on me from the barn doorway. Not with fear, with something else, something I couldn't read. It was like being watched by a hawk. She saw everything. I kept my distance. I told myself it was for her, to give her space. But really I was scared. Her presence was a constant reminder of a world outside my grief, a world that was messy and alive and dangerous, a world I had locked out when I buried Sarah. She never spoke. Not a single word. Our entire language was made of gestures. I'd leave a piece of calico cloth on the porch for her to mend her tattered deerskin dress. The next morning, I'd find my ripped work shirt sitting on that same spot, stitched together so perfectly it looked new. I left a bone comb. She left my dullest axe sharpened to a razor's edge. It was a quiet conversation, a fragile bridge being built across a chasm of silence and mistrust. But the silence was getting loud. The town of Redemption was a festering wound, and the whispers started the day I brought her back. "Holt's got himself a savage," they'd sneer in the saloon. They looked at me with a mix of scorn and a dark, twisted envy. They saw her as a prize I'd claimed, not a person I'd freed. The weight of their judgment was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the weight of her stare. Then things started to get strange. One evening, I came back to the barn to find her gone. That wasn't unusual. She'd often wander to collect herbs. But this time, I saw something scratched into the dirt floor of her stall. Symbols. They weren't Comanche pictographs. I'd seen those before. These were different. Sharp, angular, almost like letters from some forgotten alphabet. I stared at them, a cold feeling prickling my skin. I smoothed the dirt over with my boot, telling myself it was nothing. Just idle scratching. But you can't unsee a thing like that. The next day it got weirder. Tucked into a knot of wood on the barn wall, I found a little bird, carved from a piece of scrap pine. It was small and crude, but the shape of it, the specific way the wings were angled, it was identical to the little birds my wife, Sarah, used to carve. My blood ran cold. It had to be a coincidence. It had to be. Sarah had been gone for 5 years. Tala couldn't have known her, couldn't have known about her little habit. There was no possible way. I walked out of that barn feeling like the ground was shifting under my feet. I looked over at Tala, who was tending to a small patch of herbs she'd planted near the well. She glanced up, her dark eyes meeting mine, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something other than curiosity in her gaze. It looked like fear. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of that carved bird, so much like Sarah's, was burned into my mind. I lay on my cot, listening to the lonely howl of the coyotes, and a single terrifying question echoed in the silence of my cabin. Who was the woman sleeping in my barn? I had to know. I couldn't let it go. The carved bird, the strange symbols in the dirt. It was all a puzzle I didn't have the pieces for. I felt like a stranger on my own land. The next evening, I decided to follow her. I saw her slip out of the barn just after dusk, a small bundle in her hands. She moved like a shadow, silent and sure-footed, melting into the tall prairie grass. I stayed back, keeping her a dark silhouette against the fading horizon. I expected her to go to the creek, or maybe to the small mesa where the medicinal plants grew. But she didn't. She walked straight to the loneliest part of my entire ranch, the place I avoided more than any other. She went to the single, weathered oak tree on the hill. She went to the small, fenced-off plot of land beneath it. She went to Sarah's grave. My heart hammered against my ribs. A wave of ice and fire washed over me. What was she doing there? This was sacred ground, a place of memory and sorrow. Her presence there felt like a violation, a sacrilege. I watched from the shadows of a rocky outcrop as she knelt by the simple wooden headstone. She placed the bundle on the ground, unwrapping it. It was a collection of wildflowers and herbs, the ones she'd been gathering. An offering, maybe? A sign of respect? For a moment, the anger in my chest subsided. Maybe I had misjudged her. Maybe this was just her way of connecting, of understanding the grief that clung to this ranch like a shroud. Then she pulled something else from her dress, a small, flat stone, sharpened to a point, and she started to dig. Not an offering, a desecration. Rage, pure and blinding, ripped through me. I burst from my hiding place, the sound of my boots crashing through the undergrowth. "What are you doing?" I roared, my voice raw with a pain I thought I had buried. She spun around, her eyes wide, the sharpened stone held like a dagger. For a second, she looked like a cornered animal, ready to fight to the death. She scrambled to her feet, backing away from the grave, from the small hole she'd started to carve into the earth. "Get away from there," I snarled, my hand reaching for the knife on my belt. Every protective instinct, every ounce of love I still had for my dead wife, turned into a weapon aimed at this strange woman who was defiling her memory. She stood her ground, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked from me to the grave, then back to me. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Just a ragged breath. I took a step closer. "I brought you here to help you, not for you to spit on my wife's memory." Her eyes, those fierce, unreadable eyes, suddenly changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a desperate urgency. She pointed a trembling finger at the disturbed earth by the headstone. Her lips parted, and for the first time since I'd met her, she spoke. Her voice was a low, guttural whisper, rough from disuse. But the word was clear. It cut through the night air like a bullet. "Below." I froze. "Below what? What are you talking about?" She took a hesitant step toward me, her hands open now, pleading. She pointed at the grave again, more forcefully this time. "Below," she repeated, her voice cracking with an emotion I couldn't place. It wasn't malice. It was, something else. Something that looked like a warning. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and anger. This was madness. She was digging up my wife's grave, speaking in riddles. Every instinct told me to run her off my land, to send her back to whatever hell she came from. But there was something in her eyes, a truth, or the desperate need for one to be heard. My gaze fell to the shallow hole she had dug. The dirt was soft, recently turned. But beneath the top layer, I saw something. Not the dark, rich soil of the plains. I saw the edge of a wooden plank. It wasn't part of a coffin. It was too high, too close to the surface. Against every rational thought, against the screaming grief in my heart, I knelt down. My fingers brushed the dirt away. It was a board, laid flat, just a few inches under the grass. A false top. My breath caught in my throat. What was this? I looked at Tala. Her eyes never left mine, urging me on. Slowly, my anger giving way to a dreadful curiosity, I worked my fingers under the edge of the plank and lifted. It came up easily. Beneath it was a dark, hollow space, and nestled inside that space, sitting atop Sarah's coffin, was a small, locked metal box. It wasn't a desecration, it was an excavation, the world tilted on its axis. Nothing made sense. Sarah's coffin should have been 6 feet down, not inches. And this box, this secret hidden in her grave, what in God's name was going on? I looked at Tala, 1,000 questions burning in my mind. Who are you? How did you know this was here? She just stared at the box, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and profound dread. It was clear this was what she had been looking for. With trembling hands, I lifted the box from the grave. It was heavy, cold, and sealed tight with a small rusted lock. What is this? I whispered, my voice hoarse. Tala didn't answer. Instead, she reached into a small pouch at her waist and pulled out a bent piece of wire, a lockpick. She knelt beside me, and with deft, practiced movements, she inserted the wire into the lock. This was no simple Comanche woman gathering herbs. The way she handled that lock was the work of someone who knew their way around secrets. There was a soft click. The lock sprang open. My heart was a drum against my ribs as I lifted the lid. I don't know what I expected to find. Gold? Jewels? Something that would explain this nightmare? It was worse. Much worse. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried velvet, were letters. Bundles of them, tied with faded silk ribbon, and a rolled-up piece of parchment. A map. I picked up the top letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unfold the paper. The handwriting was delicate, familiar. It was Sarah's. But the letter wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to a man named G. My stomach twisted into a knot. I started to read. The words were a venom that seeped into my soul, poisoning 5 years of sacred memories. They spoke of secret meetings, of plans, of a life she was going to run away to. A life with him. They spoke of money, a lot of money, stolen money. Sarah, my quiet, gentle Sarah, who tended her garden and hummed old folk songs. She hadn't been the woman I thought she was. She had been living a lie. She was part of an outlaw gang, the most notorious gang in the territory, the Black Creek Raiders. My ranch, my home, had been their dead drop, a place to hide their plans and their loot, right under the nose of the grieving, clueless husband. The fever. Was it even a fever? Or had something else happened to her? I felt like I was going to be sick. The foundation of my world had crumbled to dust. The grief I had carried for 5 years felt like a fool's burden. Then I saw the name. At the bottom of one of the letters, a signature beneath the initial G. A name I knew all too well. A name that made the blood freeze in my veins. Garrett Boone, the town bully. The man who led the chorus of sneers against me. The man whose hatred for Tala seemed so visceral, so personal. It wasn't about prejudice. It wasn't about me sinning with a savage. He had been Sarah's partner, her lover, and he thought Tala knew where the money was. That's why he was so obsessed with her. He wasn't trying to punish me. He was trying to get to her, to the secrets she held, the secrets in this box. My rescue of her in redemption hadn't been a noble act. I had stumbled into the middle of a war, blindly grabbing the enemy's queen. I looked at Tala, really looked at her, for the first time. The pieces were slotting together, forming a picture that terrified me. The lockpicks, her uncanny knowledge of the grave. She wasn't a victim I had saved. She was a player in this deadly game, a game I was now trapped in. She met my gaze, her own eyes hard and calculating. She pointed a single steady finger at the map. Then she looked toward the distant lights of redemption, toward the saloon where Garrett Boone was almost certainly drinking and plotting. The storm I had invited into my home wasn't just here to shake the walls. It was here to burn the whole world down. And my ranch was about to become the battlefield. My mind was reeling. Sarah, a bandit. Garrett Boone, her lover. My entire marriage a lie. It was too much to process. The grief I'd clung to for 5 years had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged fury. I looked down at the map in my hands. It was covered in the same strange symbols Tala had drawn on the barn floor. A cipher, a key to a fortune I never knew existed, hidden by a woman I never really knew. You knew, I said to Tala, my voice flat. You knew all of this. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. Her silence now felt less like fear and more like strategy. She had been waiting, watching me, judging if I could be trusted, or perhaps just using me. Who are you? I demanded. Before she could answer, a sound cut through the night, the splintering of wood, a loud crash, coming from the direction of the barn, followed by a low, drunken laugh that I knew all too well. Boone. He hadn't waited. He was here. Now. Adrenaline surged through me, sharp and hot. Get in the cabin, I hissed at Tala, shoving the box of letters and the map into her hands. Lock the door. Don't come out, no matter what you hear. For a split second, I saw protest in her eyes. But then she nodded, clutching the box to her chest, and sprinted toward the dark shape of the house. I turned toward the barn, my hand gripping the hilt of my knife. The lantern I'd left burning inside cast long, dancing shadows. I could see silhouettes moving outside, at least 3 of them. They were spreading out, flanking the barn. This wasn't just a drunken threat. This was a coordinated attack. He was here for the box. Halt! Boone's voice boomed, thick with whiskey and menace. You can't hide her forever. The town's talking. Send out the savage, and we'll leave you to your pathetic misery. The lie was so blatant it was almost funny. He didn't care about the town. He didn't care about me. He just wanted what Tala had. I crept along the side of the corral, using the fence posts as cover. The rifle was in the cabin, on the pegs over the fireplace. Too far. It was just me, this knife, and a fury so deep it felt like it could split the world in 2. Leave my land, Boone, I called out, my voice low and steady. I was amazed at how calm I sounded. Inside, my heart was a wild thing trying to beat its way out of my chest. His laugh echoed again. Your land? Sarah always said you were a fool. This land holds secrets you ain't worthy of, farmer. Now give me the girl. The mention of Sarah's name coming from his mouth was like a lit match on gasoline. My plan to wait, to be strategic, went up in smoke. I moved. I came around the corner of the barn just as one of his men was trying to pry the door open. He was a lanky kid I'd seen in town, no older than 20. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. I didn't give him time to think. I drove my shoulder into his chest, slamming him back against the barn wall. His head hit the wood with a sickening crack, and he slid to the ground unconscious, 1 down. He's over here, another voice shouted from the far side. I ducked back behind the barn as a shot rang out, a bullet splintering the wood where my head had been seconds before. My ears were ringing. This was real. They were trying to kill me. The years of solitude, of hauling hay and mending fences, had kept me strong. But I was a rancher, not a gunfighter. My only hope was to be smarter, to use the land they didn't know. I scrambled away from the barn, keeping low, moving toward the woodpile. It was a chaotic mess of stacked logs and split firewood. Plenty of cover. Another shot whizzed past my ear. They were closing in. I saw Boone now, a large shadow moving with surprising speed, his pistol glinting in the moonlight. He was heading for the cabin, for Tala, for the map. A primal fear, fiercer than anything I'd felt before, seized me. It wasn't about Sarah's memory anymore. It was about the living, breathing woman locked in that cabin. The woman who, for whatever reason, I had sworn to protect. I grabbed a heavy log from the woodpile, my muscles screaming in protest. With a roar, I heaved it over the stack, sending an avalanche of firewood cascading down the other side, right into the path of the second man. He yelled in surprise as logs rolled under his feet, sending him sprawling. I didn't wait to see if he got up. I sprinted, my boots pounding the dry earth, putting myself between Boone and the cabin door. He stopped, maybe 10 yards away, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Well, look at you, the grieving husband, playing hero. She'd tell you where it is yet. Get off my land, I growled, my knife held low and ready. This was always more my land than yours, he sneered. He raised his pistol, aiming it squarely at my chest. Sarah knew a real man when she saw one. She got tired of playing house with a sad little farmer. Now, for the last time, where is the girl? The world seemed to slow down. The sound of the wind, the chirping of the crickets, it all faded away. There was only the black hole of that pistol barrel and the burning hatred in Boone's eyes. This was it. This is where I die, on the same patch of dirt where I'd buried a lie. Then I saw it, A flicker of movement in the cabin window behind Boone. The curtains, just for a second, were pulled aside. Tala. She held up the map, and then she did something I didn't expect. She held up a lit match. Her eyes met mine across the distance. It was a question and a promise. If he got to her, the map would burn with her. Boone hadn't seen it. His focus was entirely on me. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Time's up, Holt." Suddenly, the cabin door flew open. But it wasn't Tala who emerged. It was smoke. Thick, black smoke pouring out of the doorway. "Fire!" one of Boone's men screamed from the ground. Boone spun around, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury as he saw the orange glow building inside my home. The home Sarah had made. The home that held her secrets. That was the distraction I needed. I lunged. Not at him, but to the side, tackling him at the knees. We went down in a heap, the pistol firing wildly into the night sky. We rolled in the dust, a tangle of limbs and curses. He was bigger, heavier, his fists like hammers. He landed a blow to my jaw that made my vision flash with stars. But I had 5 years of repressed rage on my side. I fought like a cornered animal. My knife was gone, lost in the scuffle. It was just my hands against his. I got on top of him, my fingers finding his throat. His face was purple in the moonlight, his eyes bulging. But he was strong. He bucked, throwing me off, and scrambled to his feet, gasping for air. He looked wildly from me to the burning cabin. "The map!" he choked out. "You'll burn it all!" "It's already gone," I lied, getting to my feet, my body aching. He let out a howl of pure animalistic fury. He charged at me, no longer a man with a plan, just a beast of rage. And that's when I saw Tala. She wasn't in the cabin. She had slipped out the back window, and she wasn't running. She was circling around, silent as the night, holding a long, heavy piece of iron from the forge. A fireplace poker. Boone was so focused on me, on his lost fortune, he never saw her coming. She swung the poker with a fluid, powerful grace that was terrifying to behold. It connected with the back of his head with a sickening thud. Garrett Boone, the terror of redemption, dropped to the ground like a sack of grain. Out cold. The other 2 men, seeing their leader fall and my cabin go up in flames, didn't stick around to see what happened next. They ran, disappearing into the darkness like the cowards they were. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. I stood there panting, bleeding from a cut on my cheek, my knuckles raw. I looked at Tala, who stood over Boone's unconscious body, the poker still held ready. The fire from the cabin illuminated her face, making her look like some ancient goddess of vengeance. The fire, my cabin. "The cabin," I breathed, stumbling toward it. Years of my life, the few memories of Sarah that were still pure, all turning to ash. "Wait," Tala said, her voice sharp. She grabbed my arm, holding me back. She pointed to the well, and I saw it. The buckets, lined up, all full of water. And another detail, the smoke pouring from the cabin. It was coming from a single point, the doorway. It wasn't the whole cabin that was burning. It was a pile of oil-soaked rags she must have placed on the floor just inside the entrance. It was a trick, a bluff, a brilliant, desperate, ice-cold bluff. She hadn't set fire to the cabin. She had set fire to a pile of rags to create the illusion of a fire, a big enough illusion to make Boone panic, to give me an opening. We worked together then, wordlessly, grabbing the buckets and dousing the flames before they could do any real damage. The front door and a section of the floor were charred and blackened, but the cabin itself was saved. When it was over, we stood in the smoky darkness, the smell of burnt pine hanging in the air. Boone was still unconscious on the ground. The threat for now was over. I turned to her, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The woman I thought was a victim had just saved my life with a piece of cold-blooded, tactical genius that would have made a general proud. I had one question, and it was the only one that mattered anymore. "Who are you?" I asked again, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer right away. She walked over to where Boone's pistol had fallen in the dust. She picked it up, checked the load, and held it with a familiarity that made my blood run cold. Then she looked at me, the firelight gone, her face shrouded in the cool light of the moon. "The question," she said, her voice steady and clear, is not who I am. It's who you are, Caleb Holt. A rancher or something else. She gestured with the pistol toward the unconscious man on the ground. Because tonight, you fought like a man with as many secrets as I have. And she was right. Because in the heat of that fight, I hadn't just been fighting for her. I'd been fighting for myself, for the man I was, before grief had hollowed me out. And another darker truth hit me. I had enjoyed it. The silence that followed was heavier than any we had shared before. She had turned my question back on me, and I had no answer. We dragged Boone's heavy, unconscious body into the barn and tied him to a support beam. He was a problem for the morning. Right now, the night was for secrets. We sat at my small kitchen table in the smoke-damaged cabin. The air was thick with the smell of char and something else. Unspoken truths. Tala placed the metal box between us. It felt like a bomb waiting to go off. She finally broke the silence. My name is not Tala. I waited, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I didn't want. It's Corporal Taliana of the Texas Rangers, Undercover Division. She pulled back the sleeve of her deerskin dress. There on the inside of her forearm was a faint brand, almost invisible in the dim light. A single stylized star, Texas Ranger. The floor fell out from under me for the second time that night. Everything clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Her skills, her silence, her knowledge. She wasn't an outlaw. She was the law. The Black Creek Raiders, she continued, her voice low and professional, like she was giving a report. We've been hunting them for 2 years. They're led by a man named Silas. Vicious, smart. Garrett Boone was his lieutenant. And your wife, Sarah, she was their inside woman, their banker. My wife, the banker for a gang of killers. The words didn't even feel real. Sarah was trying to double-cross them, Taliana explained. She and Boone were planning to take the gang's entire fortune and disappear. They used this ranch, your grief, as the perfect cover. No one looks twice at a grieving widower. Every word was a nail in the coffin of the woman I thought I knew. What happened to her? I asked, my voice hollow. The fever. Taliana shook her head. There was no fever, Caleb. Silas, the leader, found out about their plan. He couldn't kill Boone. He needed him. But Sarah, she was disposable. He poisoned her, slowly, made it look like a sickness. It was a message to Boone, a warning about what happens to traitors. So I had spent 5 years mourning a woman who was betraying me, killed by the very men she was in league with. And I had been hating Boone for being her lover, when the real monster was a man I'd never even met. And you, I asked, looking at her, where do you fit in? I was sent to get close to the gang. I posed as a drifter, but someone tipped them off. My cover was blown. Boone's men captured me. Her eyes darkened with a memory she didn't share. They weren't going to kill me, not right away. They thought I knew where Sarah had hidden the key to the money, the sale and redemption. That was a show, a way for Boone to get me away from prying eyes, to bring me somewhere isolated where he could persuade me to talk. Somewhere like my ranch. You're buying me for $1. She gave a small, humorless smile. That was the one thing they didn't plan for. You ruined their whole scheme without even knowing it. You were the wild card. It all made sense. A sick, twisted kind of sense. I hadn't rescued a Comanche woman from cruelty. I had accidentally poached a captured Texas Ranger from a gang of murderers. So the map, I pointed to the box. It's a cipher, she confirmed. We believe it leads to a ledger, a book detailing every score the gang ever made, every bribe they paid. It's the key to bringing down the whole organization, from Silas to the corrupt politicians he's got in his pocket. The money is secondary. The ledger is the prize. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it all pressing down on us. We were two strangers, a broken rancher and an undercover ranger, bound together by a web of lies spun by a dead woman. And we were in the crosshairs of the most dangerous gang in Texas. What now? I finally asked. Now, she said, her eyes hard as flint, we set a trap. Silas thinks Boone has me. He thinks he's in control. He'll get impatient. He'll come here looking for answers. And when he does, we'll be ready. We? I looked at her, then around my scorched cabin. You're a ranger. I'm a farmer. This isn't my fight. They murdered your wife on your land, Caleb? She said, her voice cutting. They used you. They laughed at you. They came here tonight to kill you. This has been your fight for 5 years. You just didn't know you were in it. She was right. Damn her, she was right. The anger that had been simmering inside me finally had a name. It was no longer about grief or betrayal. It was about justice. But then a thought struck me, cold and sharp. Her earlier comment. Tonight, you fought like a man with as many secrets as I have. What did you mean by that? I asked. Before, in the yard. Taliana studied my face, her gaze piercing. Your file. Before I went undercover, I studied everyone connected to the gang, even peripherally. I read your file, Caleb Holt. I don't have a file, I said. Oh, you do, she replied softly. You weren't always a rancher, were you? Before you met Sarah, before you bought this land to settle down. You rode with the McAllister boys, didn't you? You weren't a killer, not like them. You were the planner, the strategist. They never caught you. You just disappeared, married a quiet girl and started a new life. The secret I had buried deeper than Sarah's coffin was lying exposed on the table between us. My past. A past of running, of close calls, of a life I had fled. Sarah had been my redemption, my escape from that world, or so I had believed. It turns out she was just a different chapter in the same damn book. Taliana leaned forward. Silas and his gang are killers, but they're predictable. You, Caleb, you're not. You've been on both sides of the law. You know how men like that think. I'm the ranger, but you're the weapon they'll never see coming. The trap wasn't just for Silas. It was for me, too. A chance to finally confront the ghosts of my past, both the ones I knew about and the ones I just discovered. All right, I said, my voice a low growl. What's the plan? A genuine smile touched Taliana's lips for the first time. It transformed her face. The plan, she said, unrolling the cipher map on the table, starts with this. Sarah was clever. These symbols, they aren't a place. They're a key. And the lock is somewhere only you would know. She pointed to a repeating sequence of symbols on the map, a pattern of 5 sharp turns, then 2 circles, then another sharp turn. I stared at it, my mind racing. Something only I would know, a pattern. And then I saw it. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a place, it was a path. The path Sarah used to walk every morning through her withered flower garden, the one I had watched her trace 1,000 times, a path I could walk in my sleep. 5 turns around the dead rose bushes, 2 circles around the old bird bath, and 1 final turn toward the crumbling stone bench. The ledger wasn't buried in some remote canyon, it was buried in my own backyard, hidden in the one place I couldn't bear to look, the garden, Sarah's dead garden. It was brilliant, a place so saturated with my grief that no one, not even me, would ever think to disturb it. She had hidden her crimes inside my sorrow. The bench, I breathed, the stone bench at the edge of the garden. Taliana nodded, her eyes gleaming with respect for a dead adversary. Let's go. We moved out into the pre-dawn gloom, the air cold and still. In the barn, Boone began to stir, his groans muffled. We didn't have much time. The garden was a tangle of weeds and dead stalks, a monument to my neglect. But the path was still there, etched into the earth. I followed its ghost from memory, Taliana close behind me, her pistol drawn. 5 turns, 2 circles, 1 final turn. We stopped at the stone bench. It was heavy, set deep in the ground. It took both of us, muscles straining, to shift it. Beneath it was a flat stone, and under the stone, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. We had it, the key to destroying the Black Creek Raiders. We carried it back to the cabin, the weight of it both a burden and a promise. As the first rays of sun crested the horizon, Taliana laid out the plan. It was simple, audacious, and suicidal. We don't run, she said, her voice firm. We make them come to us, on our terms, She explained that Silas would be expecting Boone to report in. When he didn't, Silas would get nervous. He'd send a scout first, a single rider. Our first move was to capture that scout quietly. The day was tense. We took turns watching the horizon while the other tried to rest. I found myself watching Taliana. The way she moved, the way she checked her weapon, the way her eyes constantly scanned for threats. She was a force of nature, a woman of purpose. It was both intimidating and mesmerizing. Late in the afternoon, he came, a lone rider just as she'd predicted. He was trying to be cautious, but I knew this land. I knew the gully that would bring me up behind him, unheard and unseen. It was a skill from my old life I never thought I'd use again. I took him without a sound. We tied him up in the barn, next to a now conscious and very angry Garrett Boone. "You're dead, Holt," Boone snarled, straining against his ropes. "Both of you. When Silas gets here—" "Silas isn't coming for you, Garrett," Taliana said calmly, holding up the ledger. "He's coming for this. You were just the errand boy, and you failed." The look on Boone's face, a mix of fury, fear, and betrayal, was something to behold. He had been played just as I had. Now for the second part of the plan. The bait. Using the captured scout's horse, Taliana rode out. She would go just far enough to be spotted by Silas's main party, which she knew would be waiting a few miles out. She would look like a lone woman fleeing the ranch, a perfect, tempting target. Silas would split his forces. He'd send a small group to chase her, while he and the main force would descend on the ranch, assuming it was now undefended, ready to tear it apart to find the ledger. It was a huge gamble. It relied on Silas's arrogance. "You trust him to be that predictable?" I asked as she prepared to leave. "Men like Silas are always predictable," she said, swinging into the saddle. "Their greed always outweighs their caution." She looked down at me, her expression serious. "Don't get killed before I get back, farmer." Then she was gone, a cloud of dust on the horizon. I was alone, waiting for hell to arrive. I didn't just wait. I prepared. I turned my ranch into a death trap. I used old tricks, things the McAllister boys had taught me. A tripwire here, a weakened corral gate there. I positioned myself in the hayloft of the barn, my rifle resting on a bale, overlooking the main yard. From there, I could see everything. They came just as the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the plains. There were 8 of them, riding in slow and confident. At the front was a tall man on a black horse, his face scarred and cruel. Silas. He held up a hand, and his men dismounted, spreading out. They moved with the cold efficiency of predators. My hands were sweating, but my breathing was even. The old calm had settled over me, the calm of the storm's eye. "Holt!" Silas's voice was like gravel grinding. "I know you're in there. I have a business proposition for you. Give me the book and the girl, and I'll let you live." He thought Taliana was still here. Good. The bait was working. I didn't answer. Let him wonder. Let him get nervous. He gestured, and 2 of his men started for the cabin, rifles ready. They were walking right toward the spot where I dug a shallow pit and covered it with a blanket and dust. They fell, cursing and shouting, and the world exploded. I fired from the hayloft, taking out a 3rd man before he even knew what was happening. Gunshots erupted from all sides. They had been expecting a terrified farmer, not a prepared defense. Bullets ripped through the walls of the barn. Splinters rained down on me. I kept my head low, firing only when I had a clear shot. It was chaos, smoke, and the thunder of gunfire. But I was still just one man, and they were starting to regroup, using the corral for cover, advancing on the barn. This is where I die, I thought again. But this time I wasn't afraid. I was angry. Then I heard it, a sound that wasn't part of the gunfight, a high, piercing whistle from the east. Taliana's signal. She was back, and she hadn't come alone. A second wave of gunfire erupted, but this time it came from behind Silas and his men. Taliana had done more than just lead a few men on a wild goose chase. She had circled back around, picking them off one by one, and now she was attacking their flank. Silas's men were caught in a crossfire. They panicked. Their professional cool shattered. They were trapped between the barn and whatever was hitting them from the darkness. Silas roared in fury, realizing he'd been played. It's a trap! Fall back! But it was too late. I saw my chance. I slid down the ladder from the loft, keeping to the shadows. Silas was trying to get to his horse to escape. I stepped out of the barn, my rifle aimed at his chest. Going somewhere, Silas? He froze, his hand hovering over his pistol, his scarred face twisted into a snarl. The farmer, he spat. You should have stayed buried in your grief. You buried me there, I said, my voice cold as the grave. I'm just returning the favor. Behind him, I saw Taliana emerge from the darkness, her own pistol leveled. We had him pinned. But we weren't the only players left on the board. A sudden, desperate shout came from inside the barn. Silas! Garrett Boone. He'd managed to chew through his ropes. He stumbled out of the barn, his face a mask of desperation. Silas, don't leave me. Our deal. Silas just laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. Our deal ended when you lost the girl, you fool. He turned his pistol away from me and aimed it squarely at Boone. Everything happened in a fraction of a second. Boone saw the betrayal in Silas's eyes. He saw his own death coming. And in that last moment, he made a choice. He lunged, not at me, not at Taliana, but at Silas. He threw his body in front of his boss just as Silas fired. The bullet meant for Boone hit Silas in the shoulder, making him scream in pain. But Boone had a knife, a small one he must have had hidden in his boot. He plunged it into Silas's gut. Silas staggered back, his eyes wide with shock, clutching the handle of the knife buried in his stomach. He fired his pistol wildly, and a bullet caught Boone in the chest. Both men fell to the ground. The rest of Silas's men, seeing their leader fall, broke and ran, melting into the night. Silence descended once more, absolute and final. Taliana and I rushed forward. Silas was dead before he hit the ground, his eyes staring sightlessly at the stars. Boone was still alive, barely. I knelt beside him, this man I had hated, this man who had loved and been betrayed by the same woman I had. He coughed, blood trickling from his lips. Holt! He rasped, his eyes searching for mine. Sarah. She was gonna leave with me. Not Silas. With me. His breath hitched. Tell her He died. He died trying to send a message to a dead woman. A woman who had played us all for fools. I stood up, the dust settling around me. The ranch was a wreck, littered with bodies and spent cartridges. But it was quiet. The battle was over. Taliana walked over to me. She looked at the bodies, then at me. Her face was unreadable in the moonlight. It's done, she said. It's done, I agreed. We stood there for a long time. Two survivors on a battlefield of our own making. The lies were all buried now, along with the men who had told them. All that was left was the truth. And the truth was, I didn't know who I was anymore. I wasn't the grieving husband. I wasn't the outlaw from my past. I was just a man standing on a patch of Texas dirt next to a woman who was just as much of a stranger as she had been the day I bought her for $1. The sun rose on a scene of carnage, but with the light came the law. A whole troop of Texas Rangers, alerted by a signal fire Taliana had set before the battle. They swarmed the ranch, taking statements, collecting bodies, and securing the precious ledger. Taliana was no longer the quiet woman in a deerskin dress. She was Corporal Taliana, a commander, giving crisp orders, her authority unquestioned. She moved with a confidence that was breathtaking. I watched from the porch of my scarred and battered cabin, feeling like a ghost at my own victory party. Her commanding officer, a stern-faced captain, clapped me on the shoulder. You did a brave thing, Mr. Holt. The state of Texas is in your debt. I just nodded, the words feeling hollow. Later, after the dust had literally settled, Taliana found me by Sarah's grave. I wasn't looking at the headstone anymore. I was looking at the single, stubborn prairie flower that had pushed its way up through the dead soil of the garden, a sign of life in a place of death. I had made my peace, not with Sarah's lies, but with my own. The grief was gone, burned away in the fire of the gunfight. In its place was a quiet emptiness. They want me back in Austin, Taliana said, stopping beside me. She wasn't in her ranger gear. She had changed back into a simple blue calico dress, one I'd bought for her in town on a supply run weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime ago. A promotion, I guessed. A medal. Something like that, she said, her eyes on the horizon. This was it. The part where she rode off into the sunset, back to her world, leaving me in mine. It was the right ending. The logical one. The hero gets her reward. The farmer returns to his fields. Well, I said, my voice rough. Congratulations, Corporal. She was quiet for a long moment. The Texas wind whipped a strand of her dark hair across her face, and she brushed it away. I turned them down. I looked at her, confused. What? Why? She finally turned to face me, and her eyes held a spark that had nothing to do with fighting or the law. I told them I had unfinished business here, that my assignment wasn't over. Silas is dead. The gang is broken. I know, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. But there's still one outlaw left in this territory that needs taming. I stared at her, my heart giving a slow, powerful thump against my ribs. I don't understand. She took a step closer, closing the distance between us. She reached out and placed her hand on my chest, right over my heart. You, Caleb Holt, she whispered, you're the unfinished business. The Texas plains stretched endless under the sun, a furnace of dust and unspoken desire. But for the first time in 5 years, it didn't feel empty. It didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a beginning. The woman I bought for $1 hadn't saved me from my grief. She had dragged me out of it, kicking and screaming, and forced me to face the man I truly was. And standing there, with her hand on my chest and a world of possibility in her eyes, I realized the biggest lie of all was the one I'd been telling myself, that I was better off alone. If you believe that the most dangerous traps are the ones we set for ourselves, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more stories where the truth is always wilder and more dangerous than the lie. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my shoes. And until next time, be careful what secrets you dig up. You might just find yourself